Hello, good morning, and welcome to Newsfile. This is your most authoritative news analysis platform, and as you know, here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. I'm your host, Samson Ladi Anyanini. What have we seen in the course of the week when SHS students are supposed to sit simple examinations? There have been situations that have become violent. When did violence become associated with examinations? The GES has cracked the whip, and some 14 students have been dismissed and 3 teachers interdicted. We interrogate why we are where we are today, with students who think that they must get everything on a silver platter. Registration exercise. The Electoral Commission is commending and congratulating itself for having registered over 16 million Ghanaians on the new register. But you clearly have been aware of the many instances of violence and accusations of deliberate attempts to disenfranchise a section of Ghanaians. How true are the stories, particularly as put out by the NDC? COVID-19 has not been kind but very wicked to jobs. Thousands of jobs have been lost. Thousands of people have lost their employment. The companies that have collapsed, how can the economy survive the circumstances? We'll be right back to deal with these vexed matters. Welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform, and here on Newsfile we put Ghana first. Samson's take, I title it, Rape, Defilement, Medical Treatment is Free. Section 8 of the Domestic Violence Act 2007 provides that a victim of domestic violence, including sexual abuse, quote, is entitled to free medical treatment from the state, unquote. The law requires that in a case of emergency or a life-threatening situation, this free medical treatment should be offered pending a complaint to the police and issuance of a report. In fact, as far back as 1971, we made a law, the Hospital Fees Act, which exempts victims of such situations from paying and requiring the state to take up their bills. So why are physicians in 2020 demanding as much as 800 Ghana cedis to fill the medical form and as much as 2,000 Ghana cedis to render the professional opinion badly needed to prosecute the evildoers, raping our women and defiling our girls? In 2017, Martin Pebu went to court to demand that the state be reminded that by the law, it should have in 2007 established a Victims of Domestic Violence Support Fund to avoid situations where poor families accept even less than the cost of the medical treatment as compensation from perpetrators to end the case. Justice Anthony Yeboah, God bless his soul, asked this question, quote, if it is not offensive to the human dignity of a victim of a crime, when an alleged criminal goes unprosecuted and therefore unpunished by reason only of the fact that the victim is poor and incapable of financing the procurement of a medical report, which is a step in criminal investigation statutorily assigned to the police. He emphasized that, quote, the government is constitutionally enjoined to respect the fundamental human rights and freedoms which exist to protect the dignity of the human person, and that both the poor and the rich are equally entitled to have crimes against them punished without discrimination on account of poverty, unquote. Sadly, when the fund was reluctantly set up, very little has been done, leaving it reportedly with only about 30,000 Ghana cedis today, even before, you know, any victim got a dime from it. I don't understand why we make the good and beautiful laws and so first I'd like to apologize for the technical hitch that we suffered. I just will conclude my take here by saying that this week, Miss Irene Abochi Nyahe of the Legal Assistance Network Ghana got many of us signing actress Amake Abebrese's petition for action. The petition, started only a couple of weeks ago, has over 14,000 signatories and should hit the 15,000 mark today if you joined by visiting change.org. If you went on myjoyonline.com, you would find the link on my take. And by searching for abolish medical examination fees for all victims of rape and sexual assault in Ghana. The law says it is free. It must be free. That is my take. Let me introduce my guest to you as we go into our discussion for today. And right here, right now in the studio, Bright Simmons. Bright Simmons is Honorary Vice President of Imani Ghana. And we have also Dr. Emmanuel Akwete. Dr. Emmanuel Akwete is the Executive Director of IDEC. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Right, so we will also have the EC represented by Dr. Trebo Kweku, and we will be looking at the issues that have come up as far as the voter registration exercise is concerned. And as you heard the EC in the course of the week, they have been congratulating themselves for having done a good job. Of course, it has been smooth in many, many places. And getting to the end of it, people got to realize that they didn't have to, as it were, mass up as they did from the start and put themselves in danger of COVID-19. In the course of this, of the week, going to register myself, I realized that the registration center was completely empty and the people registering were just sitting there. They practically had no work to do, and so it was smooth. Now, let's listen to these comments on the back of the process, and then we'll start the discussion.
Question in French, like bonjour, and then when you answer them, then they think you are from Togo.
Who asked you bonjour?
The national security.
Oh, is that what they are doing?
Yes.
Are you sure?
Yes, when they came in the morning, that is what they did. They called them, viens. When they came, they said bonjour. Then they responded, bonjour. Then they said they are from Togo. Meanwhile, they teach French in Ghana. me like this, I can speak French.
Sure.
But yes.
So how do you say how are you in French?
How are you? Comment ça va?
Ça va très bien, merci.
Ça va très bien. You see? And when you say it, then they think you are from Togo. Then they march you into the car and then they'll take you away. Meanwhile, Akufo-Addo, our president, he was educated in France. He can speak French. Is he a Togolese or is a Francais? France. Some of them too, they have foreign this thing, like our politicians like this. They have foreign. Some of them have foreign passport, ID card, but they don't do anything to them. But you, the civilian, when you have it, then they say no. You are from Togo.
We have provided incontrovertible evidence of various incidents of violence targeted at people of Ewe or Volta extraction and people of Northern extraction all over the country. Beyond that, you as independent media entities have also had several reports that you yourselves have covered over all these incidents. Again, there is pictorial video evidence. It's so clear and glaring. So when you have a 70-plus-year-old man standing before the entire Ghanaian populace and in the face of such incontrovertible evidence of violence, evidence of beatings, evidence of arbitrary arrests, evidence of deliberate attempts to suppress votes in these areas, evidence of ethnic bigotry and discrimination. And he comes out to say these things are not happening and that somebody is engaged in what? Hate for votes. Then, you just... It's so ridiculous and preposterous.
You heard the Defense Minister Dominic Neto, who also said that some of these military officials are actually being impersonated, and he hasn't sent any military officials.
But is that not even more serious? Where have you heard in the history of Ghana that people can actually wear military uniforms? So it's a confirmation of some of our concerns that people actually wear military uniforms, carry guns, and go out to polling stations and go and cause chaos and mayhem. And then there are 7 police officers, 7 military officers, and they are not able to do anything to them. Does this make sense? So he should be taking responsibility and telling us what is he doing about those impersonators and imposters.
It doesn't matter whether you are sitting Ketia or you are Dominic Neto or you are an ordinary man sitting in Doman Hinkro. You will be stopped because these were the orders of the Regional Security Council. The parties ought to respect the agreement that they themselves have signed. So the MPP, the NDC try to bust people, they will be stopped. If the NDC try to bust people, they will be stopped. If the CPP try to bust people, they will be stopped. If the PNC try to bust people, they will be stopped. All I urge the political parties to do is to respect what they have signed. Allow the people to go individually and register. And those people can only be challenged. But when you try to bust people, it is the duty of the security services, whether it is the military or the police, to stop you. Because that was the agreement from the Regional Security Council. That is for Banda and Hinko. But generally, the former president is wrong. He's misled to think that the military is being used to suppress people. The voter region he cites. Can anybody tell me that the figures in voter region are lower than the national average? Obviously no. So where is the voter suppression? Are the figures in the north lower than the national average? Obviously no. Are the figures in Greater Accra lower than the national average? Obviously no. So where is the voter suppression? Secondly, we have over 30,000 polling stations. How many polling stations have we seen soldiers visit for anybody to conclude that there's voter suppression? Of course, they have visited places where there's trouble, and that's their job, and they will continue to visit places where there's trouble. But for anybody to conclude, especially a former president and commander-in-chief of the Ghana Armed Forces, that there's voter suppression, I think he's misleading the people. So I am challenging him. I'm calling on the former president to provide us with evidence, and we will act. But as I see today, it's only mere allegation. He has not provided us with any evidence. As I said, if he's talking about Banda Hinkro, he should advise his people to start busing people. It is not allowed, and the military will continue to stop people who are busing people. Allow the people to go and register themselves. It's not your duty to bus people. Allow them to register. And everybody will be allowed to register. But you cannot buzz people. They signed an agreement not to buzz anybody. So the MPP, the political parties, I am telling them that if you attempt to buzz people, we will stop you. Whether it is NDC, MPP, CPP, we will stop you because it is only bringing a reaction from the opposite side. If the MPP try to buzz people, the NDC will try to stop them. And we don't want that to happen. So the security will stop you before you bring trouble.
We've been hearing people are talking about the 2019 register. Had a total of 16,845,420 voters. 16,845,420 voters. Apart from this, we also had 797,493 people quarantined, who were quarantined. In other words, they were prohibited from voting. These people were on the duplicates and the exceptions list. The political parties are aware of this. This list was gathered from 2012. People who tried to register double, so they were prevented from voting. And these people make up almost 800,000. So when this is added to the registered voters of 2019, what it means is that overall the total registered will be 17.6, a little over 17.6 million Ghanaians. Had the commission maintained the old register and conducted a limited registration exercise in all electoral areas and registration centers across the country, we would have estimated to conservatively, that's at the minimum, add about 2 million Ghanaians onto the existing register. And I know this is basic mathematics. 16.8 plus 2 billion will give us what? 18.8. Is that not so? So what we are saying is that without the compilation of the new voters register, the commission was on track to register some 90 million people plus another 800,000 people who remain on the multiple list. This would have given us a total number of almost 19.6 million persons. Approximately 20 million had we maintained the old register and done the limited registration, as compared to the current figure of 16.63 million. Some 3 million difference. With the compilation of this register, those on the duplicates exception list from 2012 have had the opportunity to also register. And still the commission is well within about 52%, 53% of Ghana's population. In conclusion, the commission's objective of ensuring a credible register is on track. With an estimated population of 31 million Ghanaians, many experts will agree that a voter population between 50% to 55% of the total population for a country in sub-Saharan Africa like Ghana is completely acceptable.
Right. So you had Elvis Safria Ankara of the NDC in charge of elections in that interaction with Daniel Dazi. And before then you had someone who also had a complaint about a confirmation of what the NDC has been saying is deliberate voter suppression targeted at certain ethnic groups. And then you had Mr. Bosman, Dr. Bosman of the EC also telling us what they have done so far. Now, let's begin quickly, and if I have Dr. Srebo Kweku joining us. Okay, Dr. Srebo Kweku, the Director of Electoral Services of the Electoral Commission, is the man billed to join us, joined by Simmons of the Honorary Executive of Imani Africa, and Dr. Emmanuel Akwete, Executive Director of the Institute for Democratic Governance, IDEC, to have this discussion. Once he joins us, we will ask him the questions that are necessary and have him also respond to some of the issues that our guests may raise. So let's begin quickly and see if we can deal with the aspects of the ugly side, so to speak, of what attended to the registration process. Dr. Akwete, what do you say about the NDC's charge? And I'm sure that we know that beyond the NDC making the allegations, there are independent organizations, media entities, including the state broadcaster, who also gave a broadcast of some of these acts of violence. But how the NDC puts it is whether it's proved or not proved.
It's a difficult question because I think we can only prove allegations when they are investigated. And in a situation where, as I heard the Minister of Defense saying, they should give evidence, you know, I thought it's a two-way thing. Sometimes the person making the complaints would have evidence to give, but if there is no evidence, and since it is not an entirely isolated thing, we've had reports over time, I think the agencies of state must also be up and doing investigate. And they can then dismiss it and say, well, we didn't find the evidence, could you help us in this, and so on. So it's a two-way thing. But if we leave...
The NDC on the 4th of this month held a press conference and pointed to 6 regions where they led us to various communities, several dozens of them, various communities, and showed us picture evidence, ocular evidence of people being stopped, people who were in trucks being stopped by the military, including situations where they were confronted by the indigents or their community leaders, including a chief in Banda, for example, Banda Hinkro. So we have seen those videos. Some of them are showing right away.
Yes. I think maybe we should lift the conversation to a higher level. Registration is an administrative process. And ordinarily, people, the education that precedes it is so important to getting allaying fears and getting people to know that it's just, you go, you walk in, you fill a form. It's not voting. Even your party identity would not be known because the form doesn't ask you that, you know. So the incidence of violence and the allegations and the reports and what was seen was rather too high. And we were concerned from the start that we were doing this in a COVID context. Gathering people or people not knowing what to do or not having enough education and coming together and not following protocols and so on, who had all their risks, which we pointed out was one of the arguments why people said, look, in the context of COVID, would you rather use what you have and take measures to ensure that at the end of it, it will still be considered to be credible? So in that case, to the extent that we had these incidents which were reported, some were beating, MP beating, we had gunshots, in some cases, the Kaswa areas and so on. And we know that teacher trainee was affected. You know, so we do not need this to happen across, in all regions, in all districts, or in all registration centers for us to see the gravity of it. Should a simple administrative exercise lead to this kind of violence?
So you just saw the footage,
yes,
one of them, and you saw the military.
Yes.
Together with the police.
Yes.
The NDC has issues. The military's job, they have not been assigned to be part of being at registration centers. But you see them at the registration centers.
I have an issue. I think that 2 things are important to having a credible process, a peaceful process, whether it's registration or elections. It depends on the EC's relations with the parties. Because look, without the parties, the EC would find it very difficult to do its job. And also the education that has to go for people to comport themselves. So you need to make decisions. Sometimes you would assert your authority to make a decision. But you must also pursue a path where you build consensus so you achieve collaboration. In this case, where they went into a situation where it was like the victor and the vanquished, you know, you are not getting the cooperation you need. There is some vigilance, there is some looking at faults that will be pointed out and so on. So we created that situation. Now, if you move forward further beyond that situation we created, then you see that the 2 parties would act a lot on perception, okay, and probably are not even talking to themselves. So the issue of the police coming in, was it law enforcement agencies coming? But it would have been part of their understanding that where law and order is breaking down, the police would come in, the army would come in. In this case, the minister, as I listened to him, was talking about busing. They went in to stop busing. I mean, that tells you that the process has some serious flaws. Because the incidence of busing, I remember in 2008, was one of the major things, especially when you're doing this clustering voting. The parties tend to bus, but that was not a biometric register. And therefore, the bloatedness of registers, if you look at, that's when it became more serious.
So I'm speaking to a bit of some of the specific, and I hope we can speak to those, so that you see the military participating in the exercise of security provision.
Yes.
The NDC has problems with that because I don't know what you know so far, whether the military were part of that. The information the state had given was that the military were to check the borders for
initially.
Yes, for one reason or the other.
Yes.
We had people like the Volta Regional Minister, Archibald Lecha, leading, that's the NDC making the accusation, but you could see also a video where you see him clearly on the ground inspecting people's, trying to be what the NDC calls citizenship inspector, checking people in the queue, whether they were qualified to be registered. What do you say about those things?
You see, the military's presence in a simple administrative process and the violence that for me, is intimidating. And it puts to question the conflict that extends even to registration. And it's going to affect how people perceive the process to having been credible, to having been sufficiently guaranteed they're walking in confidence and so on. The intimidation is clear. If you see soldiers coming with arms, and it shouldn't have happened in the first place. And although I listened to the reasons that were given, initially we were told they were going to undertake exercise, they'll be at the borders, and probably the borders are closed, it's against COVID-19, in furtherance of COVID-19 measures and so on. But I took what the minister said, that there was busing, and the security, the regional security said, you should stop, and now telling the parties whether you like or not. So the first thing it tells you is that the conflicts that were not resolved, there was no path today working together and see how they will ensure the credibility or integrity of even the registration process. So it gets in where you see the game being played out. Now, the army and police coming in intimidates. Okay, so I just cannot apportion who is telling the truth and who is telling the lies. The fact of the military presence at a police station wasn't warranted if the two parties had agreed to work together and the EC had worked, with them, that we must ensure, because it doesn't happen often. But if you're going to now get the police to search people's ID cards, are you Ghanaian, or as the gentleman said, do you speak French? And they ask you, and because you speak French, they can come to the conclusion that probably you are not Ghanaian. That is even a more serious violation. How do we handle that? It's a political process. It's not really the crime around if doing wrong at a polling station and so on. There are clear procedures, and they are harmless. I mean, those who were stopped because they couldn't register or challenged, they've tallied, they are going to go through a process of talking to some of them, about 30,000 or so. That is the nature of registration. It is administration. To the extent that we have this high incidence of military presence and police going in and talking to people, it's very intimidating. And I think it undermines the confidence people have in the process. So you get all the allegations coming, and ultimately it's going to affect the integrity, how people accept the quality of the register. They believe in it. The trust-mistrust issues are already there.
Okay.
And I think
so we'll get to that and ask whether, as the NDC suggests, this is true or it's possible that the numbers the EC has gotten so far may be because some people actually were prevented unlawfully, and there was suppression, as it were, and deliberate disenfranchisement of people. Therefore, it couldn't get the numbers that it should have gotten onto the register. Yes, Bright, what do you also make of the you know, violence and disagreements that have attended the registration. We have heard a very influential member of parliament sit on radio that reaches many, many people to confirm that if you were a dual national, the military had a right to stop you because you do not have a right to vote in Ghana. So if you were a dual national, maybe you were, part of you was in Togo and part of you was in Ghana, you couldn't vote. Clear miseducation. An MP who doesn't even know the law by himself.
No, I think on the issue of the involvement of the military, traditionally we have an integrated security. So if you look at the district security councils, you've had different types of security agencies involved in a coordinated effort. The problem though is that, and as Dr. Equator pointed out, the security analysis that you do for a voter's registration does not suggest that you need the degree of heightened vigilance that requires the military to provide backing support to the police. So I was surprised to see the involvement of the military to that extent. If you expect that there are going to be armed people, if you expect for it, so to give you a very good example, we've had situations where because of armed robbery in the past, there were periods when the police used to provide some backup support to the military used to provide backup support to the police for roadblocks. Because in the past, they've had situations where armed robbers have been armed to the teeth, and therefore you needed to make sure that you are using all the resources that are available to you as security coordinators for public safety. But when you have a registration process, and we did see the military people enter the polling stations and seek to enforce the law, so and seek to enforce the electoral laws, I think that was completely misplaced, because the police does have the proper jurisdiction when it comes to law enforcement. The Constitution is quite clear what the functions of the military are and what the functions of the police are. To have the military be the ones trying to enforce electoral laws simply creates the atmosphere that feeds into the general sense of distrust that was in the air ahead of the compilation of the register. The truth of the matter is that going into this, we had an electoral commission that was simply not willing to engage. The IPAC process, which has been one of the most important innovations in our electoral practice compared to other countries, was more or less decimated. Why? Because the biggest and most prominent opposition parties since our democracy began, the PNC and the NDC, were not fully on board.
How is that to blame for the violence that occurred in these places and the disagreement where military people are stopping people, and no, you hear the minister say clearly, and actually the armed forces issued a statement saying that in Banda there were issues. So the two major parties came to an agreement, and they decided that they will not bus people.
Yeah, but if there are issues that are security related, and people are being moved from a location to another location, because in rural areas you have some degree of dispersion of polling stations. There is absolutely no law that says that I cannot provide that kind of support for people that live a distance away to move into the polling station, when the truth of the matter is that rural areas have been discriminated against somewhat when it comes to the dispersion of these voter registration centers. Accra, one of the reasons why Accra experienced such amazing turnout for registration is because of the condensation of the registration centers. That has meant, therefore, that in Accra, you probably don't need to bus people because people have enough stations near to them. In rural areas, there are logistical facts on the ground. That means, therefore, that people will bus people because of the nature of the spatial arrangement that you have for voter registration. In those circumstances, if you think you suspect that the people that are being bused are ineligible, that's a police action. To use the military to stop civilians that are not armed, and where there is no security analysis to suggest that some people are preparing to undertake violent acts, is problematic.
Okay,
the reason why I brought
your point is that the EC has to take some blame because it could have increased the registration centers in these rural areas.
Not just that, and that is obviously a material resources matter. But my point is that the reason why there has been this heightened agitation, the reason why perhaps the government itself feels the need that the security situation in the country warrants the use of military power to enforce basic electoral laws will be because they knew going into the process there was no trust on either side. IPAC has not been functioning properly. So a lot of the arrangements that were supposed to have been made and the rest of it were all one-sided. Later on, the NDC returned to some of the more final meetings. But there hasn't been a sense in which there's joint and collective ownership among the parties of the processes going forward. And I'm saying that, therefore, I'm not surprised if the national security somehow suspected that people will try and create havoc. And therefore, they had a security analysis which warranted the use of military power. You only use military power if you expect that there's going to be serious havoc that the police cannot contain. You get my point? What informs that security analysis going into the process? Only because you knew that there was deep distrust and a complete lack of collaboration going into this process.
Those of you who suggest that the law has clear provisions on how to challenge somebody you suspect is not a Ghanaian national, is that these are officers of the state. They must do a patriotic duty. And also we are told that some of the other people, the civilians who organize themselves to stop some of these people, were also doing a patriotic duty because they saw people moving from one to the next border. They interrogated people who couldn't speak Ghanaian languages, some Ghanaian languages.
No, I think some of these analyses are not well grounded in the simple fact that the law of residency applies till you register. If by the time that we are due to register, for some reason I'm itinerant, right? And so it turns out that I'm temporarily away, right? I'm resident here, but I'm temporarily away. I've been resident for the last 1 year, but I'm temporarily away because I'm an itinerant farmer and I've moved next door, and somebody is barging me in. That does not necessarily by itself provide grounding to suspect that the person is ineligible to register. You need proper intelligence estimates to make those determinations. And my argument is you can't simply use physical barriers to stop people because you think they are ineligible. It has to be informed by some degree of intelligence estimates. Nobody has arrested the members of parliament, the political figures that have been implicated in this, right? Nobody has said, look, we knew for fact, because of intelligence estimates, that they had gone in and brought people that were not resident in that location, or they've gone in and brought people that are not eligible to vote at all. If you're not going to prosecute these people, you're not going to investigate them, you can use physical measures to just stop people because you suspect they're ineligible. That's the point I'm trying to make. We did scouting. Luckily or unluckily, we focused mostly on the areas around Greater Accra region, a little bit in Ashanti. And so we didn't see any of these things. So I'm just making these points based purely on the evidence that has been adduced on this show and in the media. I wish that some of our scouts had seen some of these things for ourselves. Then we could make independent analysis about the situation.
It's too early to even come to the independent analysis because you need the data and you have to look at various factors. For me, I think what is important and we need to emphasize is that the EC is also responsible for convening the National Election Security Task Force. In fact, they work closely, okay, and it comes under the police chairmanship and authority. The army backs the police up when the police cannot, but you then would know that it is the police asking for reinforcement and so on. Throughout the registration period, we actually didn't hear about the National Election Security Task Force. I heard that some months ago, some regions, there was some National Election Security Task Force identified.
District level.
Yeah, district level. But the national security, which then would monitor and the EC would even engage them and so on, was conspicuously absent.
So nothing, we don't know the intelligence estimates that are backing these decisions.
That is the point. You see, and there was a lot of mistrust. And you know that in our situation, usually, when you are in opposition, you mistrust the state institutions. It's impartiality, okay, and the professionalism, the autonomy they have to do things. So given the COVID-19 context where you're told that some soldiers have been moved to certain border areas, and already there were arguments and debates over the motive, and they said, no, we're just going to enforce border closure and so on. And now to see them then extending whatever the mandate is into busing and who should be stopped and so on and so forth. The pictures I saw, the first thing I wanted to know is where is the police? And how is this going on? Where is the national election? Could we be told something?
We have border patrol guards,
yes,
part of the customs units and the rest. And we keep using the military, knowing very well the history we have in this country of military rule.
It was intimidating. I think it's marred to some extent the integrity of the process. Integrity in terms of the trust people have.
Can we look at the tensions this has brought and the potential going into December 7? What can be done now? For example, the NDC suggested that in a press statement, of course, we heard the chief in Banda referring to some of the people who were being driven away and stopped, even being prevented in the queues from registering, that there's a relationship with these people who speak Ewe in the area dating back to 1919. And the NDC suggestion is that let me read this part of the statement. So we must also add that due to the relocation of settlements to make way for the Bui Reservoir, most of the Ewe people of Akanya Krom, especially those from communities such as Doko China, have found themselves on one side of the dam, whilst others remain upstream of the dam, and mostly go fishing, staying for several weeks and months before coming back on market days. The number of people who are currently staying upstream are close to 42,000, whilst those at the bonus site are about 20,000 people, if not more. These are all Ghanaians that are being disenfranchised on the basis of their tribe and nothing more. What can be done? Should the EC or the stakeholders pursue a process of seeking to give opportunity for the places where these allegations have happened, for people who are indeed Ghanaians to be given the opportunity to vote? Because as they say, some of them were actually holding their Ghana cards and yet were turned away because they were in a bus.
I think,
yes.
Okay, I think it's an important thing to consider. I know that the EC has set up a committee. I don't know whether they are going to look at only the deduplication process. But I think that this issue, yes, that's their foremost task. But I think that this issue of identification that was questionable, okay, those who confronted them, and those who are maintaining, look, we are Ghanaians, and to then look at the ethnic or the language you spoke, I think really, really damaged our citizenship identity and claim. As citizens, that's what the common identity we should hold. We've gone too far into saying, well, you speak this language or you're living in this part of the country, so you can't even vote. I hear that there were areas where other people who spoke other languages, but in every region there are Ghanaians from different places. So our ethnicity playing that role, I think, has damaged. It's created a lot of problems, and there are pains. There are people, I saw some people who were complaining why they've been refused. They say, I'm a Ghanaian, but why, you know, these are emotional things that could stay for a long time. So the best way to go forward is for those people to be identified. I do not know if there was a system in place where their complaints were taken. The EC said, look, we've heard you, but we'll note this, we'll follow up.
At least the NDC has identified 6 regions
yes,
and various communities within those 6 regions.
Yes.
You are saying that it is possible
to investigate,
to give a special dispensation.
Yes, investigate, establish the veracity of it, and it's fair to come to a conclusion that yes, we will create a process for them. That's why I'm saying that I do not know how they are tackling the different processes. You cannot just close your eyes over it. You see, when you blow the trumpet of success for register, it is the integrity of the register. Okay. Do people believing that it's fair? It's going to, otherwise it's going to affect everything else you do. Okay. So this has to be tackled. Because if they are citizens and truly they are claiming, the state must have an entity. The EC itself must be interested in investigating or sending some agency to say, go and talk to them. And let it be done transparently, openly, and across, wherever it occurs. Okay. Otherwise,
so,
it's a big problem.
Deal with the bigger issue of the question of whether the register was bloated or not.
That's what I'm waiting for.
Yeah. Do you think that there is opportunity or it is worth it?
Absolutely.
It is worth it, particularly because of what this has brought, the tension it has brought, and what you never know, people may be contemplating ahead of in December 7th, that to assuage and to give people opportunity so they don't get angry and do things untoward, the EC can give a special dispensation, investigate those particular areas, and allow some special room for those who have their IDs and those who can prove their citizenship to register to vote. That's a very interesting story. Once we don't have a contrary, claim to it, we can take it as what it is. There's a journalist, Star FM, Atewini Imbila Lawson.
Yes.
She said she went to the place to register, and somebody got up to challenge her, one of the agents. And the basis of the challenge is, you don't speak Ga, you don't speak Chi. So she asked the question to this agent, is Ga and Chi the only languages spoken in Ghana? She got challenged, but eventually, I think 2 days ago or yesterday, she went through the challenge process and she has her ID. You have no idea how some of these things would have fed into people's sentiments.
No, I think the EC has to embark on a wide-ranging reconciliation exercise, not just in respect of these matters. Going into this particular exercise, and for the last year and a half, this has been the most divisive electoral process I've seen in my 2 decades of observing Ghanaian politics. The Electoral Commission has been extraordinarily insensitive to the views, the attitudes, the concerns, etc. of a wide range of stakeholders. Whether it's medical doctors giving them advice, whether it's civil society institutions advising them, whether it's chiefs asking to be accounted to because they are the custodians of the native traditions that in most parts of rural Ghana is actually more predominant and effective than the formal civil state. This is not, we've never seen this before.
They have a responsibility. I mean, if things go wrong, they are the ones who hold accountable.
That is why it is in their interest, and definitely the interest of all of us and the peace and security of this country, that they immediately embark on a reconciliation exercise which requires a reconciliatory tone and stop the triumphalism. A lot of their press releases, a lot of their press conferences is triumphalist in character. A lot of them are based on an attempt to taunt so-called opponents and perceived detractors. None of it makes any sense. You are a constitutional body. It is us that are mandated to criticize you to ensure you do the right thing. It is not up to you to start criticizing citizens and start to engage in exchange of words with citizens. They have to start embarking on a massive reconciliation exercises with the major opposition parties, with some sections of civil society that have been. This has been the most non-inclusive process we've seen towards our elections since we returned to democracy.
And what form should this reconciliation exercise take?
Let's be open and transparent to engage. Like this concerns around whether the register was bloated, was not bloated, etc. And then going forward, how do we keep some of the problems that they say bedevil the old register, and where people have different views of what it was that bedeviled the old register? That process, we need a national dialogue, a proper, objective, rigorous debate about what happened, what was it with the register, and going forward, how do we prevent the same distrust and whatever it is from continue to fester? You need all voices, particularly those that have been most engaged in this debate, to be at the table discussing these matters in a truly objective manner, seeking to learn and understand and to improve. So the triumphalism should stop.
Once this period of registration is over, there is a period when people can walk into the district offices and get registered.
Yes.
Would you not rather advise the parties that are claiming that they have the figures, the numbers about people who are potentially their members who have been disenfranchised, to rather, if they can, bus them to the district centers so that they register them?
They usually have to announce this continuous registration program.
Educate.
And educate. It's been erratic.
Show where they are.
Yes, last couple of cycles been a bit erratic in terms of how they've designed it and etc. So once they've done that and made it clear that you can still go in and register if you do not have problems, because they said they're going to do 2 extra days in their districts, I think today and tomorrow, whatever.
That's right.
And we will see how many people take advantage of that and whether the same problems will persist. You see, there will be no point having a continuous registration exercise if you're going to have gun-toting soldiers standing outside purporting to be making determinations about whether somebody is eligible or ineligible without due process. And so a soldier in a what do you call envy track standing astride the road. It's not due process. That's not how you if you suspect somebody is ineligible, you stop them from voting. If there's credible intelligence that somebody is embarked on wrongdoing, somehow they're scheming to get non-citizens on the register or non-residents onto the register in a particular location, you arrest those people, you investigate, and you prosecute. You don't send soldiers to physically stop people. That is not due process.
And it should have been the police.
It should have been the police as well.
So that
people trust that it's a normal civil process that is underway.
Exactly.
Especially when the soldiers are not trained.
Samson, you see, the real problem is that this whole process has elements, whether intended or unintended, that is disenfranchising. Okay. And there is an administration.
Explain that. What are the elements?
You see, those who, for instance,
or unintended, that is disenfranchising.
Yes, I mean, if you said somebody should vouch, okay, and others couldn't go through the process, and they say, well, but I'm a citizen, I'm a Ghanaian, and so on and so forth, and because of that, they are not registered. Their name is not on the register, okay. They cannot vote.
Oh, you certainly must get two people to vouch for you.
Yes, you certainly must.
That shouldn't be difficult.
But you see, there are also some challenges that occurred even in those processes. So in mopping up, I think there has to be some special dispensation, some arrangements made to ensure that nobody legitimately feels disenfranchised. They have the right to vote. It's part of the birthright you have as a citizen. If we don't do that, we are going to get into a situation where the feeling that I've been disenfranchised itself would intensify the conflict that we already have, and that is exclusion. You want everybody to be inclusive in this process. So I'm hoping that, and it's part of healing, the part of the reconciliation, that because every part of Ghana is somehow split between our two dominant parties, and so on. And I think that process is healthy.
Okay.
Their rights are respected, and the EC has administrative.
Let's talk about the figures the EC has posted.
Indeed.
And interrogate the questioning whether, in fact, the old register was bloated. You can tell the suggestion in the EC's communication in this regard.
Which is very strange. I've never seen an organization so keen to discredit its own heritage. But let's start very clearly on this matter. When you say the register is bloated, you have to have some basis. And that basis has often been in about 3 dimensions. There's been an argument, one, that there are foreigners on the register in large numbers. There have been arguments that turnouts in some years have not corresponded to turnout that is expected, given the number of people on the register. And then thirdly, there have been arguments that when you look at the total population of the country, to have more than 50% of the population on the register is somewhat suspect. None of those make any sense whatsoever. And nobody has done any rigorous analysis that supports any of these 3 conclusions. There's no published peer-reviewed work. There's no published normal white papers that attempts to justify these claims.
Afarijan is on record to have said the register is bloated on the basis of this phenomenon of parties busing people to register.
We'll come to that.
But he was also using the UN.
Yes, we will come to that.
Yeah.
There is bloated as in deliberately machinated bloating, which is often what people suspect, that there are people that have a deliberate interest in keeping the register bloated to achieve a particular electoral purpose. Whether or not there are ineligible people on the register, it's not evidence of that type of bloating. And we'll do that distinction properly as I go on. When it comes to this issue of the national population compared to the total number of registered voters, there is enough comparative evidence worldwide to give you a good trend. And the factors that determine whether there will be a high proportion of voters in the population or electors in the population are very well understood. So I'll give you an example. In Greater Accra, you have almost 95% urbanization. That factor therefore means that because Ashanti region has less than 70% urbanization rate, though Ashanti has more people, Greater Accra has more voters and electors. Somehow, urbanization seems to correspond well to how many people vote. And I think a lot of that is due to the spatial organization of the vote, of the electoral registration process. We know that the political maturity and the level of competitiveness in the politics of that country also affect how many people in the country will be on the voters' roll. When we did our census in 1960, we had about 6.7 million people. Registered voters were about 2 million. That was in the range of what, 30%, right? In the subsequent election in 1969, the total population of voters compared to the total population as a whole was in the region of about 28%. Then we moved on to 1979. And by 1979, because of the increased political maturity and the competitiveness of those elections, because in 69, remember, the CPP had been proscribed. In 60, we're more or less on the way to a one-party state. So in 1979, when you have true competitive democracy emerge, we had hit around 48% and was rising. By the time we got to 1992, we were about 52%. From 2000 onwards, the 53 to 55% range has been pretty consistent except for 2004. What happened in 2004? The Electoral Commission decided to change the nature of identification to photo identification, which increases the processes required. They didn't have enough cameras, etc. And they did the registration process in a period of 2 weeks. For that reason, it was not surprising then that in 2004, we saw a significant decline from 2000, about a 5% or so decline. That has been the only time the trend has been backed. Since then, we've seen a consistent trend when it comes to how many people are on the voters' roll compared to how many people are in the population in general. People have often talked about voter region, and a lot of the animosity has centered around whether or not there are foreigners on the voter roll itself. The truth of the matter is that since 2000 to date, we've had roughly 35% in increment from the voter numbers in 2000 to the voter numbers here. The voter numbers in 2000 were about 983,000. Today, if you combine OT and voter, because the two regions were split, you are in the region of about 1.3 million, thereabout, 3-4 million, thereabout. Now, what that suggests, and then if you compare that to Ashanti region, where in 2000 they had less than 2 million people, and today they have almost 3 million people, and therefore there's been a 50% increase. The suggestion that somehow there's something suspicious going on in voter is completely apocryphal and high fantasy. Complete high fantasy. There's no evidence whatsoever there is something peculiar about the situation in the voter region. Not evidence, not a single strand of evidence. The increase and the increment in the voter region has been extremely consistent. And indeed, it mirrors much better the increase in the national tally compared, so we've moved from about 10 million people to about 17 million people, right? Right. That is in excess of, it's almost 70%, right, in that region, right? Volta has done about 35% of that. Now, if you compare that to Greater Accra, which has seen the most increases over time, the best explanatory variable for that trend is urbanization, is the degree to which spatial organization of registration centers help this, etc. None of these apocryphal, conspiratorial analysis about somebody sitting in Togo busing tens of thousands of people. Do you know the logistical feat involved in bringing enough people from Togo to register to a point where it can impact national elections? In a register where you have 17 million people, you will need to bring in about 100,000 people or thereabouts. Do you know the number of vehicles you need? Do you know the impact on border crossing? And what it will mean for normal flow of goods and services if all we had were people just being bussed, tens of thousands of buses, literally, over a certain period. So none of this makes any sense whatsoever. And if there is anything that is great about this particular campaign that we are on, it's the fact that, for once, we are going to demolish this theory of Togolese contamination and this theory that somehow the electoral register is the product of some conspiracy among who we don't know permanently. The evidence now is conclusive, and I'll go into it if you give me the chance in your next cycle. Conclusive.
By the over 16 million that it has registered so far, it finds a certain consistency in the registration process, or the data as compared to the old register, except that it clearly suggests that if it had not done this, but done what you and other, the double dozen of civil society organizations were suggesting, would have ended up with a register whose population compared to
Samson.
compared to the national population of 31 million would not have been consistent. It says Greater Accra,
No, I heard him.
Greater Accra, Ashanti region, the eastern and central regions maintained their previous percentages, so to speak. It was only the remaining regions that had some, if you like, marginal increase.
Greater Accra has increased. But point is very simple. I listened carefully to the Electoral Commission's statement in regards to this matter. And I think that, with all due respect to the very eminent professionals that work there, a lot of the analysis was statistically offensive. One, the only reason they managed to hit or exceed their target was because the things that they told us they would do in the registration center, for which reason some of us said they could not register more than 12 million people, those things were not done. And we have videos that if you show on the screen will show that. In a lot of, until about 21 days into the process, a lot of the stations that we visited, we saw overcrowding by design. The system was designed such that they would be overcrowded because they were so keen on being able to register as many people as possible in order not to be accused of having bungled the process. That the process that they, the one
I thought from the start they made us understand that this thing was clustered and that each would have their turn.
Well, they said they were going to keep one.
So if we had actually followed that,
no, that's not
we didn't need to mass up from the start.
That's not the point. Regardless of whether people mass up or not, you give certain principles you're going to abide by. You're going to separate people by 1 meter. You're going to sanitize the tent once every time somebody comes on. We went there, we took videos. In fact, we have videos of other practices which we will disclose this weekend.
But those could not be deliberate, as you suggest.
What I'm saying is that they did not go there intending to do those things. Because when we went there was nobody standing there saying, you, 1 meter. You know, there were no like signs on the ground that said you stand here. So there was no plan whatsoever in those stations, in Kwashiman, in Santa Maria, in Koliklote. We sent scouts all over. We have videos that we're going to continue to release. Secondly, we saw evidence also, and I think Kodio has confirmed some of this, that guarantor contractors were being tolerated widely. They were practicing in the open. And there was nothing the EC was doing to stop them. And that meant, therefore, that the EC was extremely invested in the process being very fast, even if it meant breach of the law. So you had a lot of forms that were already pre-guaranteed, that were there, and when you go, they give you one of them and you just fill something quickly and you move away. There was no effort whatsoever to make the guarantee process anything close to being of high integrity. Everywhere that we went, the guarantee process was extremely shambolic. In many cases, already done, the people don't know them, they are standing in the station and do it. So my argument is, if they had followed all the things that they said they were going to follow, one, they could not have hit that 17 million, which would have been a disaster for this country. The alternate disaster is that because they did not follow these things, the likelihood that people are going to get more infected is high. We are lucky that in this country, for some reason, severity and deaths are low. Thank God. But this is not due to the EC. This is just blind, dumb luck. So that is the first point. But the more critical point is this. The EC then had, I couldn't believe it when I heard them say that they had an exemption list. And this exemption list, which is also the multiples and the duplicate list, has over 700,000 people. And then somehow, if they had not done what they just did and had opened it up, all those people will come from somewhere and come on the register, which makes no sense. The exemption lists are a subset of your existing main list of people that you believe are disqualified in one way or the other. So whatever the dynamics are, it's not an extra set of names. You get my point? It's not an extra set of names that somehow will have materialized out of thin air. The 16.8 million we had going into this process, that 16.8 million, a subset of it is on that exemption multiples and duplicate list. So there's no it has no contribution whatsoever in this analysis. The real point is, if you have done limited registration and you follow the consistent trend since 2000 in terms of limited registrations, the only time that we backed that trend was ahead of 2008. And that was because in 2004, we had a particular problem where we introduced these digital pictures and used only 2 weeks. So there were a lot of people that were not on the register then. So when they had the chance to register in 2008, we had a sudden surge of 1.8 million people. Everything before then and after then has been very consistent. From about 632,000 people registered, limited registration, in 2006, to 1.1 million in 2016, to 1.2 million last year. Nothing suggests that if you are done limited registration, you get 2 million. it's actually statistically offensive because we have the evidence that
this
shows
is the
the
EC
trend.
that is doing this job, and that was its projection that if he had done the limited
which of his projections has
registration,
ever been true?
he would have gotten 2 million.
Which projections have been true? Ahead of this election, they said they would do 13 million people. Then as they saw the enthusiasm build up, they revised to 15 million. And now we know they are 17 million. The 16.6 million that they are banding around is because they are accounting for 35 days, not 36 days. And the reason they are doing 35 days of 36 days is because they don't want to give some of us in their mind, they think that some of us will take credit if they acknowledge that they've hit 17 million. So the argument is very clear. The argument is very clear. If they have done limited registration, the best statistical analysis we have from 2000 suggests they will not have registered more than 1 million people. That would have taken us close to 18 million. Then you need to account from 2012 onwards what we call the age-adjusted death rate effect on the register. Why? What does that mean? People that are 18 years and above that have died, a certain proportion will be on the register. If you analyze that set, you get about 1.2 million people that have died since 2012. The good thing is that our mortality rate has been dropping from about something in the region of 10 people when we started this, this particular trend of analysis that I'm discussing, to in the region of 6.8, that's 0.68% of people die every year in this country, compared to 1% earlier on, and about 0.8% in 2012. That means, therefore, that the number of dead people on the register is actually reducing in terms of overall proportion. But you still have to account for it. And if you account for it, you get about 1.2 million. Now, if you are then subtracted the 1.2 million from the 18 million, which will have resulted if they had gone ahead and done only limited registration, you get 16.8 million, leaving people on the register. What is the effect of this analysis? The effect of this analysis is that this expense, this nearly $150 million expense, accounting for the actual cost of the registration, nearly 40,000 people or so, whatever, the machines that they bought, which is in excess of $60 million if you add software and the rest, the data center, plus the $60 million in salvageable value in the existing equipment that we've thrown away. If you add all of that together, you are hitting $150 million in a country where people sleep on the street. All of that effort was purely to remove a few dead people and a few minors from the register. The problem, though, is that they could not have removed the minors because they do not accept the use of birth certificate.
Dr. Akwete, don't you find that, there's some amount of rationalization in the presentation that may not be consistent with the earlier projection by civil society as led on this very platform by Bright Simmons, that it was mathematically impossible for the EC to be able to register 12 million in 40 days.
Now, we said 12 million is what they could if they follow the rules they laid out, and they didn't follow the rules. So that is the
I think that what is important is we've gone through a process, and we tend to be worked up by the number of registered voters, the total, and so on. When you look at the trend, the elections, on elections day, what happens? It tells you clearly that it's averaged around close to 11 million, 2012, 2016. So you may have 15, we had 14 in 2012, 14.2, I would say. Then it became 15.7. But on election day, less, voted. And that for me is more important, because if we see bloatedness as meaning that every single person on the register is going to vote that day, and that's where you see foreigners and others influence the election, then that's fine. But it doesn't happen that way. Now, how do we explain the difference?
I have a theory on that as well.
Dr. Farijan once explained that at some point, the voter's card was the most credible ID people wanted. But they were also not durable. I mean, for whatever transactions, they got spoiled and people always needed more. So when we didn't have the biometric system, the multiple registration, one of the purposes was people wanted more cards that they could use to transact their business, because the system, they were demanding ID cards. But when the biometric came in, you see, the focus of biometric system that they procured in 2012 was more to detect multiple registration and stop people from doing that. Because if you multiple registered, you also voted. You could go to places under the manual. And this became very effective. that you couldn't. So multiple voting opportunities were really reduced to the barest minimum. And it's continued with that. So as far as we are concerned, in a biometric registration system, if only because we're using our prints, handprints are very unique, you know, and the system is such that you'll be found out one way or the other, and so on. The impact of the bloatedness, you know, on the outcome is itself dealt with in a way.
But also the point is this.
Yes.
The turnout analysis often is not backed by real statistical analysis. And this is the reason why. When we've had low turnouts, and it's really 2000, 2008, and then we had this recent one in 2016 that people say was also low because it's below 70%. In all of those instances, the one thing that was consistent is that we changed governments. Every time we've changed governments, turnout drops. The reason is perhaps because of the fact that in this country, incumbent governments lose elections based on whether or not their base is
strongholds
activated, animated or not. That could entirely explain. That's the most effective explanatory variable for turnout in this country.
Now,
nothing to do with bloat.
Dr. Kuti, so, I mean, bottom line, if you look at the data as the EC, the EC has given us, if you compare that with the statistical services, you know, data about, you know, Ghanaians who are supposed to be at least 16 years, you know, numbering
16,
about 18 years of about 17 million, you know, 17 million plus.
Yes.
And the projection that doing 53% of the voter population for register is best science.
No, that's not
then the NDC's claim of suppression will not be backed. And also the NPP's claim, which the
bloatedness.
of bloatedness will also not, be backed.
I think they work out nicely. You see, a number of conditions that would have taken us out of this situation were never met. We've already known since 2012 and in 2016 that we do not clean up our registers. The dead, we don't. I mean, the greatest success of this exercise for me is that you've cleaned up the dead. You know, except those who registered.
It's a very expensive way to clean up.
It's a very expensive way, but that is the only thing. But in terms of people underage who get onto the register, it's exploded.
Well,
what has happened now?
The birth certificate, which is the only way you can do that determination.
I'm just looking at what happened and the fact that if you're a minor and you're bussed, and it happened in 2008, a bit into, I'm not sure about 2016, because usually the busing becomes effective when you are topping up. You know, you're just looking at not an entire general registration. You're looking at people who have come of age, and therefore they must go into the system and so on, like in 2008. But in this case, busing became the biggest issue. And that undermines what you have. So the numbers have gone up, but the one problem that we thought, the minors thing, where the two parties generally would mobilize people, would buzz them and so on, became what has defined this registration.
But Doc, you have a situation where the two main sources of legitimate bloating, so I'm distinguishing between legitimate bloating and the types of conspiratorial bloating that they often talk about, is so-called minors and so-called dead people, right?
Yes.
Now, the only institution in this country equipped to prevent minors and dead people, and to prevent minors and dead people from being on the register is the birth and death registry.
Yes.
They issue two documents, the birth certificate and the death certificate.
Yes.
Both of them are contingent on one, because if they don't have a record of you, they can also tell you that you're dead. Now, if you then say that that document is not allowed, on what basis are you going to remove minors? What is the, how are you going to tell that somebody is below a certain age or above a certain age if the only institution empowered and equipped to do this is being delegitimized by its documents being routinely removed?
You see, but that is why I'm making the point that the high incidence of busing itself then undermines the integrity. The problem, part of the problem we're trying to solve by saying let's have a whole new exercise because it's bloated and so on. The minors contribute to that, but we are not able to, we failed to do that because that became the dominant thing.
Invest in a birth and death registry.
Yes, so
we go and spend $150 million on
exactly. So you did it, and then the most important thing, look, multiple ID cards. So in 2015, for instance, you remember there was this workshop the EC organized at Alisa to look at whether we needed a new biometric register or not. And some of the reasons we put forward is that there are certain structural things biometric cannot solve. Part of it is identifying a minor or a foreigner, and then who is dead and who is not in the person. So what we thought should be done is that if we had used only the national identifications card, which everybody must have, but we did it, we were not ready to really compile a new voters register with a higher integrity than we have had previously.
Because
we were not ready.
You do that is to invest, 20% of the $150 million you just blown on this, 20%, building a system where in the birth and death registry, they extend coverage from the 60% or so nationally to almost 100%. How do we know we can do this? In the northern region, you have about 85% coverage birth certificate. In the voter region, you have just about 50%. So we already have national inequities, which additional investment can clear. Secondly, when it comes to death certificates, if you were to put $5 million into the birth and death registry tomorrow, and they were to go and register the mortuaries, add the cemeteries, and invest in the municipal systems for death registration and the likes of it, connect to the hospitals, you have an API from the birth and death registry to the EC that will flag every minor and will flag every
an
dead
equivalent
person.
amount would have helped the national identification.
20% of that amount. Instead, you blow $150 million and get back to exactly where you were, with no room going forward to prevent the things that you said were important.
So this cannot be the final, the last time we're compiling.
Very, very final comment here. And as far as the EC is concerned, we now have a register that, after the deduplication process, we can say is credible enough. We will not do a fresh start again going forward.
Where they get that assurance from. And also there was voter suppression.
No, but you just said we've spent 100 plus
50.
Achieving nothing. Achieving absolutely nothing.
So we should not be doing that again.
No, you see, we have to do that again because, look, we haven't done the census. There are lots of speculations on what the population size is, and then the
so you do limited registration, and then you top it up.
Well,
we will not have to do a new register again.
I'm not sure we would not have to. You see, it's a political thing. When in this case where there was you need a consensus.
No, are you saying that the dead people are going now to automatically remove themselves? Or the minors are somehow
it's not going to be possible.
It's going to continue because they did not invest in the fundamentals to fix the fundamentals.
Yes, so you need to deal with the fundamentals, and then you know that everybody has this card. There's birth and death registry, well connected into databases, and that tells you automatically you need a certain level of investment.
You don't give $60 million to a French conglomerate and then buy whole new equipment when you bought 2,000 of them in 2018, and then purport therefore that you've done well. Also, there was voter suppression. Let me tell you why there was voter suppression. Every year, of the returnees that come to this country, or the foreigners that come to the so-called visitors that come to this country, about 400,000 of them are actually Ghanaians that are returning back. A lot of those people tend to register. In fact, a lot of the ROPA sentiment has been because of those people. Due to COVID, that 300,000 or whatever is missing on the register. Those people, if they were to come back sometime December to vote like they used to do, will not be able to vote. So this notion that there's been no voter suppression
and the census will take place hopefully next year.
All right. Thank you guys, the two of you, very much for joining us and sharing your views on the registration exercise. If you are sending us a message or tweeting on the subject, remember to add #Newsfile, and we'll take a break and return to read the messages to you. My guests have been Bright Simmons, Honorary Vice President of Imani Africa, and Dr. Emmanuel Akwete, who is the Executive Director of IDEC, Institute for Democratic Governance. We were billed to have Dr. Stribwo Kwaku in charge of electoral services of the Electoral Commission, but he's not been able to join us. We do not have any reasons for that. We'll take a break and return shortly. You're welcome back. This is Newsfile, it's your most authoritative news analysis platform, and here at Newsfile we put Ghana first. So I'll share some of your tweets that have come in. So this one from I Am Vampire says that one of the best Newsfile programs I have watched. Fantastic submissions by B.B. Simmons. Pato E-Rich says that serious analysis, even the minors that had wanted to take out should should have passed the 18 years by this exercise. How do you add an emptied list to the actual register? Newsfile, I wish an audit firm is contracted to compare both data to understand the EC's work. Prof. Income says, I just want to, okay. Sorry, I don't read praises for myself on the show, but thank you very much. If I've seen it earlier, I'll just keep it to myself. Kwesi Osei-Tutu says that simple mathematics shows the old voters register was bloated. We had 16.8 million registrants on it. Adding 18 years and first-time registrants, say 1.2 million will make 18, but we had 16.7 million for this new register. Clearly shows the old one was bloated. Okay, Cannings Elijah says, kudos to the EC of Ghana for setting targets and achieving them in a planned systematic manner. It's a win for Ghana and the state institutions when they are allowed to work with justified proposals. Edu Plus says, as much as I agree with Bright Simmons on some of his submissions, most of his thoughts are hypothetical and mostly based on statistical inference. Practicality of registration is different from hypothesis. David Agweko says, I'm enjoying the education a lot from your panelists. I can see clearly that the registration is meant to demonize theories and perceptions that did not exist. These guys are just intellectually dishonest with Ghanaians. God be our help. And I read one from Charles Rekubrobe, tweets at iTarzan, says, can someone please educate me if facial recognition biometrics were captured in the recent voter registration exercise? What do you say to that?
Well, since 2004, we've always taken digital photographs. Yeah. So that is what we mean by that. Okay. However, there are two elements of this. If the software you are using to do your authentication is enabled, it can also automatically verify the picture. What the EC, the problem with the EC's arguments is that they appear to suggest as if they needed to change the machines to do facial authentication, and you don't. The existing machines could take pictures. What we needed was a software upgrade to be able to authenticate the pictures you've taken. And that had nothing to do whatsoever with changing the machines that are taking the pictures. Why? Because unless you intended to do, for instance, 3D cameras, where therefore in order to increase accuracy, and therefore the existing cameras you had could not work. You could make the case that we need to buy new cameras. All right. But to change the type DVR on the basis that you want to do facial recognition is actually really, really strange.
Thank you. Augustine Agbanaza says that JoyNews, it seems that Newsfile could have done a lot better in balancing views on the performance of the EC by inviting someone else apart from Bright Simmons, who had always spoken against the EC. Okay, Bright is always on Newsfile on EC. Why? Okay, if you have been with us from the start, you would know. And if you have followed our handles from yesterday, you would have known that the EC, the panelists advertised included the EC's Dr. Srebo Kwako. Thank you very much. Just a couple of more of the messages, just one or two more of them. This one from Bruce Mancha Bruce in Takrady. He says that with the greatest of respect, Bright Simmons has made several unsubstantiated arguments, which in my opinion have been rather unacademic and highly propagandist. For instance, his point in support of the voter suppression argument lacked scientific basis and was made to fit in the negative narrative that has long sought to discredit the compilation of the new voters register.
How do?
Amazing convictions. Quite frankly, I think the EC deserves commendation for their hard work and perseverance. Okay, so Bright sent in that one. I'll take just this other one from Don Pino in Malam. He says, the Jean Mensah-led EC handled the registration process creditably and efficiently in the face of the pandemic. Bright and his cohorts, who predicted doom even before the process started, must get serious on Newsfile this morning and accord us some intelligence. Instead of the nauseating posture, why not eat the humble pie and congratulate them?
Congratulating for what?
The cynicism and the know-it-all posture is very nauseating, to say the least. Nana Hesse Ojiri says that Bryce Simmons must slow down with his attacks on the EC. In fact, he never thought the EC could do the work that it has done. In 2016, the Banda case, a little over 5,800 voted for the NDC, a little over 5,000 voted for the NPP. The difference was about 500. Strangely, Esiedun Ketia told us that the military had stopped over 41,000 people from registering, but looking at the numbers that voted in 2016, they were less than 14,000. So we ask, where from the 41,000? Statistically impossible. Okay, a final one here from Kweku and Chubuesiako. It says, at what point would those for and against compilation of the new voters register end the litigation of their positions, and for all of us to start looking at how to ensure the elections on December 7 pass off peacefully, freely and fairly? Who is right, who is wrong, won't change the fact that we will have a new register for 2020 elections. Let's move on. All right, thank you for those messages. And as always, this program is brought to you by the kindest courtesy of the Bank of Africa, strong as a group and close as a partner. MTN everywhere you go. Ashesi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Consolidated Bank Ghana, we stand with you. Duraplus, where Duraplus goes, water flows. We lead, we build you a home. Star Assurance, your solid partner. And Rehoboth Properties. This is Newsfile. Now let's get to deal with some really, really very difficult situations for many Ghanaians. As you may have monitored, there has been a certain survey that has been done by the statistical survey, that's the Business Tracker Survey. And it shows, among others, that 770,000 workers, that is 25.7% of the total workforce of Ghana, had their wages reduced, and about 42,000 employees were laid off during the pandemic, during the lockdown only. It is a very disturbing situation. Many, many jobs have been lost. In fact, about 85,000 businesses are closed. They closed during the period and can't seem to get back up. So, Bright, what do you see? Because we're still in the pandemic, and it does appear we're going to be in the pandemic for a long while.
Well, I mean, there are a couple of quick points to make. I'm not very sure that the statistic you read was right. That is 25% of the workforce. If it indeed is 770,000 people, so that must have been mistranscription or reporting error. We have over 30 million people in the workforce if you project to the population now. I think 30 million last year, maybe 13.5 million. So if 770,000 are unemployed, that is in the region of about 5%, right? So I will not accept that figure, but it could be mistranscription, or it could also be misreporting. What is definitely true, though, is that we need to distinguish between structural unemployment that may have been introduced by COVID-19 and seasonal unemployment or episodic unemployment that the pandemic have brought about.
The reference I made is about their wages having been reduced.
Yeah, but we said 770,000 people.
I get the issue of the percentage.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
But these are not people who lost their jobs.
Okay.
They had their wages reduced by about half or so.
About half or so, okay. So that will not be unemployment if your wages go down. Definitely has an impact on your purchasing power. But I also wanted to distinguish between structural unemployment situations that may be bred by this problem and those that are purely episodic. And we have to pay attention to that distinction. So structural will mean that due to the pandemic, we have industries that decline significantly for a long period. And therefore, their capacity to employ is significantly reduced for that period, for that long-term period. Whereas, so in the US, for instance, when they measure unemployment, they tend to say that you should have been unemployed for more than 4 months to count in the unemployment statistics. This, to a certain extent, takes into account the episodic nature of some of these employment adjustments in the economy. So I'm not as worried about jobs, and the reason I'm not is I'll tell you very, very shortly. A lot of the sectors that have been heavily impacted, hospitality. So yes. I think hotels said that the occupancy has dropped to 30% from 70%. I think it's dropped much lower than that.
According to the Employers Association, we are talking about, and they have not updated the figures.
Yes.
We're talking about 6,000 to 7,000 people having lost their jobs in the hospitality industry.
Yeah, but we're talking about occupancy having gone down to 30%. From my experience, just going around Ghana in the last couple of weeks, I think it's gone down by more than that. I've gone to hotels in Kumasi that are literally just zero occupancy. So it's been savage. The question is, will it return as soon as you open borders? Because a lot of these problems currently are deliberate, right? We've closed borders deliberately. We are asking hotels to limit number of people that come in there. We've still not formally allowed restaurants to seat patrons, though some restaurants are obviously currently ignoring the law. So a lot of those things you can change overnight. What you cannot change overnight is the confidence. That might not return. So if Ghana, in this reset, if foreign visitors reduce permanently, because for some reason they are worried about their health. So they don't want to go into countries in Africa or some place like that, just because of the psychological effect that this has had on them. Then you could have a structural problem in the hospitality industry. So far, everything appears that it's episodic. If borders reopen, the hotels are going to come back alive. The logistics companies that are having huge problems, air aviation, because they're having problems, currently, will perhaps all be restored to vibrancy. There is also the likelihood that restaurants, it depends on obviously also on purchasing power and people's sense of their well-being. If people think that their incomes are going to decline over the short haul, that's the confidence matter. That then leads to real structural effects. As in, you have industries that suffer structural revenue decline over the long term. Then you begin to have problems. So I think a lot of it's about working on confidence, because a lot of the problems that have led to declining jobs in many sectors are episodic.
Okay.
If you remove the restrictions.
So wait and let's hear from Professor William Boateng, Head, Department of Economics, University of Ghana, Director and Senior Fellow, International Institute for the Advanced Studies, University of Ghana. Thank you very much, Professor William Boateng, for joining us on Newsfile this morning.
Thank you, Samson.
Right. Now, the Minister of Finance had gone to Parliament when he went with the supplementary budget, and he said, quote, COVID-19's, quote, impact has been devastating on the people, business, and economy of the world, with 2.2 billion jobs. That is 68% of the global workforce under threat, unquote. Now, the Employers Association gave us a report on a program organized by Joy Business a couple of weeks ago that some 6,500 people have lost their jobs in the hospitality industry alone, and that was not an updated figure. Then the Employment Ministry also revealed that 160 companies, that's the formal sector alone, reported to the Labor Office that they were laying off 7,000 workers. These are those who have reported. So you can imagine what may be happening to the informal sector, and even in the formal sector, those who have not reported, you know, the job cuts and so on and so forth. There's something that also sticks out to all of us. We are told that there are about 33,000 private schools in Ghana. We know that most of these private schools have not had work to do in the course of this period. How severe is the situation, and what can be done?
Well, Samson, thank you very much, and good morning to colleagues, the studio, and good morning to our listeners. I think in times like this, we have to look at jobs and employment as what we call derived demand from that perspective. And what we mean here is that in basic labor economics, we say that employment is called derived activity. In other words, labor demand is a derived demand. You get a job if you work. So anytime economic activity slows down, you expect job growth to slow down. Anytime you have economic activities picking up, then you expect employment to also pick up. So if you have a situation where restrictions have caused a lot of jobs to go down, it means that economic activities have gone down. And that is where we need to look at. So long as economic activity goes down, then employment is going to go down. And for the purpose of this discussion, I'm going to equate jobs to employment. And all the figures that you have brought up are, from my perspective, not surprising. I'm sure Minister of Employment will also come up maybe next week to tell you about what they've done, a bit of survey that have been carried out. And the findings are not different from what we are seeing. This is because the moment economic activity slow down, you are losing the hospitality industries, you are losing manufacturing, you are losing entertainment and events, you are losing even agriculture, you are losing education. Then you expect that people who are working in these enterprises are going to lose their jobs. The last time I checked EMI's data, I realized that about 110,000 teachers are engaged in private schools at basic level. I'm talking about kindergarten, primary, and JHS. So if you have all these private schools shut down, then you expect that about 100,000 people are going to stay at home, not receiving anything. But as a researcher, I always want to caution about just mentioning absolute figures. It is important that you relate it to the total employment. I don't think throughout the country, all hotels have closed down. You can have some hotels that are working. So when you relate it to the number of people that have been employed in that enterprise, then you will get a better sense of it. For instance, if you tell me 45,000 people have lost their job in the hospitality industry, then you tell me that it employs 100,000, then the best analysis will be 45% of people in the hospitality industries have lost their jobs. And that, for me, is how the analysis is supposed to be. And Saskia Service figure that came up, the 700,000 and the 25%, I didn't hear you well. I had Simon trying to punch some holes in it.
So they did, the Ghana Statistical Service.
It's difficult for me.
Let me just bring you that figure. The Ghana Statistical Service conducted a survey, and with the support of the United Nations Development Program and the World Bank, conducted a survey, and their survey disclosed that more than 770,000 workers, and they put a percentage to it. They said 25.7% of the total workforce have their wages reduced, and about 42,000 employees laid off during COVID-19's partial lockdown. They have given also various other figures, including, specific, and they say about 85,000 businesses in Ghana are still closed down. So that's what we are faced with.
So the analysis here is a sample. It is not the total number of workers that SASCA service are covered. They will by all means cover a sample of workers. If you look at data, the actual data of SASCA service from GLSS 7, you realize that we have about 10 million people engaged in what we call employment. There's a difference between employment and labor force. Even though we have about 31 million people, we have about 10 million people in all kinds of employment. And you need to understand what we mean by employment. The ILO will tell you that employment is somebody who is engaged in activity and the output is offered at the market for sale. So if you have an individual who has a backyard garden and engages that activity and uses it at home, it is called subsistence. That kind of activity is not employment. It is working, but not employment. So if you look at the ILO definition of all these, they've come up with that. So when you are looking at figures, you have to also look at the concept as well.
So the question is, what will be the impact of, in all, you had 115,000 businesses that have either permanently or temporarily closed down across the country. What is the impact of this on the economy?
The impact of this starts from loss of jobs. So you have a number of people who are going to stay at home losing their jobs. You are going to have some who have to endure pay cut. Remember that not all enterprises will close down and will not continue to pay workers. You can have some enterprises who will close down and will still have to pay some amount of money to their workers based on conditions of service that they entered in with those workers. So you can have some who are going to have pay cut. You can have some who are going to lose their jobs and will not have any income, because those people who are employed, some are casual, some are permanent, some are temporary, some are senior management, some are junior management, and you have to put all these things into account. And some will even have to ask their workers to even work from home. They will not shut down completely. For how
long can a going concern that is suffering the COVID-19 keep workers at home and pay them?
Well,
realistically,
it depends on that enterprise. If it's a government enterprise, you realize that when we had shutdown of schools, government was still paying workers. There were so many activities in the public sector that were shut down, but government continued to pay workers. So it depends on the worker that you are talking about. And you also have to put in perspective the research that was conducted by SASCA service and juxtapose it with what we are having now. I know that as the restriction has been eased, some enterprises have returned. And Ministry of Employment small survey that they conducted will tell you that about 25% of jobs that were lost have been recalled. So you realize that it depends on the time that the survey took place. So during the time that we have the shutdown, the lockdown, you realize that all activities in Greater Accra and Greater Kumasi came to a standstill. And therefore, the impact will be different from when we have eased the restriction and activities are taking place.
Now please hold on for me. Solomon Kote is the General Secretary of Industrial and Commercial Workers Union, ICU. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Solomon Kote. Unmute your mic. Can you hear me now?
Okay.
Great,
Yes.
great, great. You are on. What
Yes.
what times are your members in?
Hello?
What times would you say your members are presently in?
We are in very difficult moment. We're a moment when the future looks very, very, very difficult to predict. We're in a moment where every day a worker is thinking our jobs are going to go up, because the practicality is that ever since they started easing the restrictions, productivity has not remained same, and a lot of activities have actually slowed down, including the closure of the borders. So we are still not in normal times, and unions have also not been able to make any negotiations to add on to anything, even though expenditures have been rising left, right, center. We are just not in good times.
Well, the contract of employing someone, the law is quite clear, and the law even didn't need to say so. The employer must give you work. When you do the work, then the employer will pay you. If there's no work, the employer certainly cannot be expected to pay you. While we are being told about the huge numbers of people who, because are unable to do any work, are not getting any monies, what is it that you are doing to help people to keep body and soul together in these times?
Thank you, Samson. What we have done so far is to engage the respective employers under the enclave of the ICU. And from the hospitality center, serious negotiations have gone on at the standing negotiating committee level, where we have agreed and reduced salaries by 50%. Now, we did this at this particular sector simply because it is not that there is zero activity. Right. Some activity is actually running. What we have also done again is that upon easing the restrictions, the employers have started having a little more jobs. Hence, the 50% salary gets a slight change by when you are called to go and work. In fact, the employers are aware if we lose all these people and we're having to get normal tax, to re-engage all over will be very expensive. So we have all come into such terms, and MOUs have been signed to that effect. Inclusive of that, their Social Security, Provident Fund, and taxes are being paid in that proportion.
Well, this is for the formal sector. Tell us, what is the picture in the informal sector?
The informal sector, I would say, is bizarre because, one, they don't have a regular income. Two, their jobs are also dependent on several factors and conditions. Most of them also depend on the formal sector before they'll be able to move. Example, if you take the Ghana Beauticians Association, we call GABA, they depend so much on the formal sector that produces their creams and all those things for them. Now, they are not getting materials, they are not producing. So they are virtually, properly locked down in terms of no activity at all to run. So for them, their source of livelihood have been stalled to a very large extent, and nothing seems to be working for them. All efforts they are also making to at least bounce back and come back. People are not visiting the salons that the way they used to visit any longer. The batik, tie and dye, that informal sector that we also cover, they are also complaining that nobody is coming to buy because incomes have actually gone down, and therefore lifestyle of the average Ghanaian is now being having some permutation and make sure that you bring yourself to a level where your income is. So a lot of activities have been stalled, and this is greatly affecting the informal sector. The market where me and you go, they have taken advantage of this, and they have increased almost virtually every foodstuff, making life a bit more difficult than we had experienced before the coming of the COVID-19.
The unemployment insurance that the Minister of Finance announced when he presented the mid-year budget, how much can it do to ameliorate the situation, medium to long term? I don't know immediately how it comes in, and how much work are you collaborating with government to ensure this is achieved?
was a welcome news for labor in particular, because the only social security we have is the SNIT. And we realized that the SNIT didn't have coverage in the circumstance by which we find ourselves in today's world. Hence, coming up with unemployment benefit to be paid through a specialized insurance scheme have been welcome on board. At the moment, committees are working to find out which insurance company can take it, at what levels premiums are supposed to be paid, who qualifies to contribute onto it, and then above all, at what time will that insurance company be responsible to look at it. Now, beyond this, we are also looking at if the law that created SNIT could also have, some amendment, because we have argued that before SNIT law came in, there was nothing like student loan. But then, over a period, that became necessary, amendments were made, so that if the unemployment benefit that virtually everybody is looking at it, that SNIT should be able to do something about it, then their laws should be amended and then take care of that, while the insurers will look at the general issues, whether it comes at that force majeure, fellow, or what have you that we have in the law. So for us, we think it's a welcome news that must be carefully thought through and make sure that when it is implemented, everyone who becomes a contributor to the fund will at least appreciate the fact that until the event happens, I won't get. If it happens, this is what I'll get. And the confidence level in having such security will grow with the working force.
So this is long term in the future, and it is a contributory scheme. It's not as if there's going to be a scheme of employment benefits, or as it were, social benefits, handouts to particularly people who are unemployed. How soon is this, do you think, this can come on board? And in the meantime, what should be done?
Samson, like you agree with me, this came up just about the review of the 2020 budget, media budget. And therefore, I would say there were no committees set in place to discuss before the minister made the presentation. It is after the presentation that the pieces are being put together. So this may take a little more of time for the issues that the two of us are raising, could be brought on board. But the earlier one, the quick one I call the unemployment benefit, I think if we look at the SNIT structure, something can be done there, because at the moment, all our children in the tertiary institutions who are benefiting from SNIT, loans, they are being guaranteed by the contributors.
That's right.
So in Christ, I guess, SNIT will also come out with a package to make sure that the SNIT support to the contributors gets another feather in their cap. For the insurance element, we know a lot of more work ought to be done, but within a good time frame to finish it on time, because we don't know whether the mutating attitude of this corona, we are going to get another one, and a severe one. And insurance company, you are coming in when they could see that the chances of getting the accident is very high, then your premium also goes high.
Right.
And then the issue of workers also looking at our income, whether we can pay the kind of premium they'll be demanding from us. So it's going to take some bit of a time, especially when HO is telling us that this disease will be with us in the next 3 years. And no insurance company knowing very well that if I undertake this particular policy, I am bound by the kind of terms and policies that are around to suffer such payment. Right. So I believe the insurance company who are interested in this particular package may even be hedging now, because everybody is looking at how this coronavirus is behaving.
Mr. Kote, what will be your final words? What would you say to workers? And look, I've come face to face with this circumstance, particularly people in the private teaching institutions. It is not an easy time at all. For those who have the opportunity and privilege, so to speak, of getting 50% of their salaries, they are thankful to God. But there are those who have not gotten a dime since this pandemic set in. They have children, they have dependents, they have rent, they have bills to take care of. Life is not easy at all. What would be your final words to workers, particularly those who find themselves in such a situation?
Thank you. In the first place, I would say let's all, in this particular bracket, whether we are getting fraction of our salaries paid or those of us who have gone out with nothing, and there's no hope in the immediate future, at least looking at the closure of 2020 December, to hold ourselves, not to give up, and then try to begin to explore. One may ask, explore what? In fact, nothing ventured, nothing gained. So we want all workers in this category to at least examine themselves from within and see what else can be done. We may have to drop from the formal things you are doing, look at some informal thing, get any other thing that can put body and soul together until other time, because Samson, the pressure is that horrible. Rents are due, people are not able to pay, and children are also in the house not schooling, their eating habits, and the burden of medicals, etc., etc. So we know that the average Ghanaian worker today is not in the best times at all. But we should not sit and cry, because there is no specific prediction as to when this challenge is coming to an end. So the earlier we look within ourselves and see what we can do. The good book says that there is dignity in every work. If it means even begin also to sell ice water, the common things to do to create an activity,
right,
we will want to advocate for that. If it means going to the chopper and get something down, put your degree somewhere and do those things, that will really help us than finding ourselves in these political seasons where people might rather want to use this. This is a global phenomenon that has happened. And
right,
therefore, as a Ghanaian worker, this is what I will urge every one of us to be doing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Solomon Kote, General Secretary, Industrial and Commercial Workers Union, ICU, for seeking the welfare of the worker. Keep doing that job. Now, let's have Professor William Barboating give us his final words about what should be done in the circumstances. What should be done? What should government and all other stakeholders and even individuals, what should we be doing?
Well, I think whatever you have to do will depend on how the pandemic will unfold. And I'm sure we will have to depend on the experts to be able to guide government, and government to be able to influence our behavior in that respect. I'm sure if you look at, I'm not a health expert, but if you look at the data, you realize that at least when it comes to death associated with COVID, Ghana is not doing badly. And perhaps that may influence some of the decisions that government will take. So easing restrictions gradually will then bring back economic activity in gradual sense. And then as economic activity picks up gradually, then employment and jobs will also pick up gradually. If you take education and of course private schools, for instance, I'm sure those that are taking BEC exam and SSC exam have also gotten some call back, because some of these teachers who were sitting at home will have to come back to help the students. And that means that as activities begin to return, then employment will also come into force. But before I say anything, before I continue to give what individuals must do, I think some of the discussions must be put in proper perspective. When we talk about job losses and we equate it to unemployment, we tend to have a problem with the figure, because what we are facing now, unemployment will have different kinds of people in that respect. You have those who have left school and have never joined any enterprise and are unemployed. And then you have some that are working and are now coming to join unemployment. So if you have unemployment insurance, which kind of people are you going to target? So research, rigorous research and data is very important when we want to come up with any policy. Now, coming to what individuals must do, I know government direction will influence what individuals must do. But as a worker, the moment you get pay cut, it means that you have to also look at your budget and also cut your budget and ensure that you focus on more important stuff, the basic necessities, but not to do stuff as it used to be. So then it means that you have to do that. The same applies to enterprises. And I'm happy that my senior brother was talking about what his people did, employers did, because laying off workers outright wouldn't have been the best. But taking a pay cut is the best way to ensure that at least the enterprise is seen as having some kind of social posture, and then for the workers to also know that they are also taken care of. This is what I think must be government's posture in easing the restrictions gradually and gradually. For me, it's the best way of getting economic activities returned. In the informal sector is very heterogeneous. While some are having vibrant activities, some may be suffering. So you cannot put all of them together and say the picture is very bad. Some are doing well, some are not doing well, and that is where we need to look at the data and ensure that policies will be based on the proper concept of issues and the data, but not what we read on the internet.
Okay, thank you very much. For the time being, our reliance is on what the Ghana Statistical Service is doing together with the World Bank and other collaborators. Professor William Barboating is Head, Department of Economics, University of Ghana, and Director and Senior Fellow, International Institute for Advanced Studies, University of Ghana. Thank you very much. Now, Dr. Kwete, so the reality is what I was, pointing out about earlier. At the very start, I remember interviewing Dr. Bokping of the University of Ghana Business School here, and he gave an example, which is the true reflection of what is happening. That you have friends who are calling you and saying, look, I have not been paid this month. There's no money coming the next month. I have rent. Look, I have to take care of kids. I can't even put food on the table. And some may ask, 20 cedis is all I need. 50 cedis is all I need. So life must be very tough. Yet there are people like Mr. Solomon Kote said, who may not be willing to move from their degree to get onto the street to perhaps sell, sachet water, if that is what it takes to survive.
Well, the impact, we are looking at how to manage the impact and the coping strategies. I think that one of the important things we should bear in mind that COVID is a pandemic, and the magnitude of it, and in terms of how it's affected all sectors, has also required that in the most advanced countries, the state plays a very important role.
Yeah.
Governments, if you look at the USA, the economic stabilization, the funds myself, and so on. We haven't had that, but perhaps the intervention by the government, electricity, water, and so on, was addressing some social impact and probably to some limited economic impact as well. And then since then, we've seen government also come out with some specific stabilization of some sort, targeting SMEs and what to do about that and so on. I think these are all important, but I think COVID itself calls for us not only to think survival, which is going to be needed over a long time because we don't know when the pandemic is ending. And we are integrated into the global economy, regionally, globally, and it's not really an issue, even if we are not at the center of things, how much our economy is able to be revived and grow and get back to where we were, it's not determined solely by us. So most of the account given for me are part of the survival strategies. But you also have to ask yourself, how do you go beyond survival? And restart the economy or energize it in a way that probably is good that our dependency on imported things, very soon I anticipate that there will be shortages of the things we depend on that we import, the rice and tomatoes and so on. What do we do? There are opportunities in there. And although I hear employment figures and schemes, I wanted to know the strategy that says, look, the imports will not come in, but it gives us opportunity. Can we look at local agriculture? Okay, we shouldn't buy new shoes and cars and tires, but can we feed? I think for many people, if they can feed, well, they have food to eat and so on, the rest can wait, you know. And so I'm concerned about the strategy that says we're going to be more self-sufficient and will not be hungry. Okay, so the person who wants 20 cedis also knows that even if you gave them 20 or 50 cedis, they could survive because kinky and whatever, you know, soup and whatever they are going to get locally. And that would just be
for a couple of days.
No, I mean, that's just why I'm saying have a strategy that says food is what we don't need, we are not importing, but can we produce on a scale that ensures that prices go down, there is some surplus, you know, and people have access to it. Or you could even subsidize prices for them. It's a kind of strategy that I think probably we're going to need. So a sector might grow. Probably agriculture, especially the food production, could grow in such a way that it could cushion us off. And that could improve health too, and all those things. So for me, it's a very important strategy. My problem is that there would always be the marginalized groups. So we are talking about employment, the private sector, but I think we're living in a developing economy where quite a lot of people also depend on, you know, others, and government especially. Now, how do we respond to their needs? We saw the lockdown distribution of food. How are we sustaining this? There's the LEAP program and so on. How sustainable are all these things? Because clearly...
That's over. It was for the lockdown.
Yes, that's what I mean. But it hasn't changed the situation.
Right.
So how are we also responding to that? And where is that strategy that says that, look, our economy is not just private and public. You also have the voluntary, non-profit sectors where actually the humanitarian needs are addressed with all sorts of capacities on the ground to be deployed. They are not mobilized. And thirdly, I think what for me is most worrying is that we've taken our eyes off it and we are looking just at SMEs, private sector, and so on. But their economy also grows when they can export. And they are not going to, it's not going to happen anytime soon.
Right.
So what is the total impact? I'm looking at society in its entirety, not just a limited group. That really is constrained because its market is also constrained by the situation. So I think we should go beyond the individual. The individual in these circumstances needs the presence of some
Now, Bright, what will be your final thoughts on this? When we started the whole thing, in the US, the example, I think it was you who gave an example like that. In the US, they voted, I think, $2 trillion, you know, some to businesses, and they actually did a cash handout program. People were getting $600. I think just a week ago, that has come to an end, and there were people who were, you know, becoming a bit frustrated because they needed it to continue, and you know, the politicians were not sure how to do that. In Hong Kong, they had a similar thing like that. Of course, we don't have economies that can sustain that, and we don't even have the data to be able to do that in a very good way. The statistics suggest that some jobs analysis experts suggest that some jobs have been lost forever. What will be your final words about what people should be doing as individuals, the state and corporate institutions?
Before I answer your question, just because Professor Watson mentioned it, I need to clarify that the point I was making is that a certain number was given for the national workforce, and then a certain number was given for job income reduction, and a certain percentage of the national workforce was mentioned. And my point is that there is no way that number can be 25%, given that the national workforce is in excess of 13 million. So that's the only point I wanted to make, and I need to clarify it. I don't think the issue when it comes to social relief and welfare in Ghana is one of ambition. So you mentioned the US social relief interventions in the wake of COVID, and you sought to compare that to Ghana's. In actual fact, Ghana is more ambitious because Ghana is seeking to spend something in the region of $17 billion in the CARES Act. And that is in excess of 30% of GDP. The US interventions measure in the region of around 20% of GDP. So in terms of ambition, we're already overambitious.
The US is doing immediate things. The Ghana cares that you are talking about, that is for the next how many years as is projected?
Well, not necessarily, because some of that also, like the SME funds and the rest of it, are fairly immediate, right? But I agree with you that ours is a much more structured thing, but that's what it should be. The other point I also wanted to point out was that we have to look at net jobs creation and not job losses, or net job losses. We have to look at whether there are structural changes happening in the economy, some of them short-term, some of them long-term, as a result of the pandemic, which therefore might mean that jobs are shifting to different places. So if you look at the current numbers, for instance, ICT growth is going through the roof, right? In the midst of the pandemic. I think it's in excess of 11% or something like that. I have to double check. We've seen increases in service as a whole. So services growth is about 7.6%. The worst case scenario in terms of GDP decline, the 0.9% estimate did not pan out. We are now seeing actually about 4.9% GDP growth. So there are sectors of the economy that are growing. And if service is growing at 7.6% in the midst of the pandemic, that tells you there might have been adjustments in jobs. I saw some of the people that I used to know that work in some banks recently start to move into this whole shared transport thing. They bought a set of small cars and they are doing shared rides on the platforms.
Is it local Uber?
Uber, Bolt, and the like. So they buy cars and then they hire drivers to do that. These people used to work in banks. So those readjustments need to take into account. So those readjustments need to be taken into account when we are looking at job loss. We can look at job loss as an isolated phenomenon. We have to look at adjustments in the economy as a whole. So net job creation is important.
Right.
The other point that I wanted to make was that for the first time in our history, I think, at the very least since the beginning of the Fourth Republic, we have two investment bankers at the helm of the economy. Yeah. We've not had two investment bankers at the helm of the economy before. So these are people that understand investment and production. And my concern will be that a lot of the focus so far that I've had, and like Dr. has mentioned, is very social welfare focused. I'll also be interested in understanding what is their view of how the structural changes that are happening imply for productive changes in the way that the economy is structured. So for instance, one of the problems that we've seen is that foreign direct investment pledges are not translating into actual delivery on the ground as much as we used to see in the early 2000s. So a lot of the investments are pledged and committed, and we do some follow-up by looking at the GIPC data that they point out in terms of FDI and actual projects on the ground. And every time we've taken the flagship projects, so things like Marine Drive, etc., and you dig into it, even the trade fair, rehabilitation, you dig into it, you find out that progress is very slow. So I think we have a structural problem around FDI, foreign direct investment coming in.
Yes.
That where we are not delivering on the pledges, or the investors are not sufficiently assured enough to invest what they pledge that they will invest. Okay. Now these things I think are important. I think the number one issue is really general confidence. If general confidence is bad, we're going to have structural unemployment problems, not the episodic ones we are seeing now. What is going to happen is that some businesses will dramatically cut down actual output. That would mean, therefore, that people lose their jobs permanently, and then because they lose their income, purchasing power goes down. You have a ripple effect throughout the rest of the economy. So I'm more focused on measuring confidence now, and perhaps Imani and others can also join.
Thank you so very much, Bright Simmons and Dr. Emmanuel Akwete, who are my guests in the studio. We'll take a break, and when we return, we should have some time to talk about the developments in the education front. As students are sitting their exams, 14 of them have been dismissed, and then 3 teachers have suffered. About 4 schools are involved. We'll be right back. You're welcome back to Newsfile. This is your most authoritative news analysis platform, brought to you by the candid sponsorship of Bank of Africa, strong as a group and close as a partner, MTN everywhere you go, Ashasi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa, Consolidated Bank Ghana, we stand with you, Duraplus, where Duraplus goes, water flows. Waylead, we build home for you. Star Assurance, your solid partner, and Rehoboth Properties. Now, let me welcome from the West Africa Examinations Council, Agnes Te Kujo, Head of Public Affairs. Thank you for making time to join us, Madam.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Great. So first, we would like to know, because now we know that some punishments have been taken by the Ghana Education Service. 14 students from Sekondi College, 3 of them, Cheneboa Kodia Senior High School, 3 students there, Bator Senior High School, about 4 or 5 of them there, and then at Jabing Senior High School, you have about 2 others who have all been dismissed, and in addition to the dismissal, been barred from participating any further in the exams. That apart, all students who are said to have been found to have been engaged in the destruction of property are to be surcharged for the full cost of the damage, and their results will be upheld until they have made the full payment. Now, question is, do we know from what the GES has the authority to give these sanctions? If we read the West African Examinations Council's Act 2006, you are empowered to take such sanctions. The law before then, the PNDC law, empowered you also to take some of these sanctions for the assault to invigilators or people you send to these centers. But has the GES got that power to do so?
Well, first of all, let me say that this is a school examination, and these candidates are the candidates of schools. And these schools are managed by the Ghana Education Service.
Okay.
So the Ghana Education Service also has disciplinary authority when it gets to actions that go on in these schools. So the GES, I believe, have the power to do that because they needed to calm down and clamp down on all the unruly behavior that was going on in the schools. Now, these candidates have been asked to leave the schools, and also those who have sports or property have been asked to pay for that. And I believe that these sanctions are according to the rules that the GES has.
In terms of de-recognizing the Brights, that school is the Bright Academy. Is it the GES that has done the de-recognition and relocated the exam center to Ofori-Penying, is it? Or it is the WAEC that has done so?
It's WAEC.
So how come you say the exam is for the schools? I don't know whether you
came across the press. I didn't get your question.
You said it is a school exam.
I'm saying that, yes, but the relocation of Bright Senior High School to Ofori-Penying was done by WAEC. Yesterday, we issued a statement signed by the head of national office saying that because of all the activities that went on at the Bright Senior High School on Thursday, the 6th of August, the council strongly condemned the behavior of the proprietor and the candidates. And in order to ensure the integrity of the examination and safeguard the lives of exam officials, we decided to relocate the school, the center from Bright Senior High School to Ofori-Penying. And that is not the first time. Whenever WAEC is conducting exams and we see that there are certain malpractices or certain things that are going on at a particular center, that does not guarantee the safety of our exam officials. WAEC can decide to move the center from one place to the other.
Yeah, so my question then is, if you can do this, then it's your exam, not the school's exam, right?
When I say it's a school examination, what I mean is that, you know, we have the private candidates exam, was popularly called NOVDEC.
Right.
So that one was totally under the purview of the council, where we were the ones who appointed supervisors and regulators and did all that. You understand me? But when I say that this is a school exam, I mean that WAEC is conducting the examination on behalf of the Ghana Education Service.
Okay.
With the private candidates exam, is totally, I mean, the GES has nothing to do with that. It is totally a private candidates exam, and it is WAEC that undertakes everything in connection with that examination.
All right. So as we gather from the decision taken by the Ghana Education Service, apart from the dismissal, it says that they have been barred from writing the current examination in their schools. WAEC, by your law, has also the power to cancel the entire results of the candidates and perhaps prohibits them from taking an exam for not less than 2 years. Are you minded to take any further sanctions?
I think that any further sanction that the council will take will have to send our reports to our committee. The Ghana Examinations Committee will present the report, and then they give us the go-ahead to take any further sanctions against the candidates or against the school. So what happens is that during the course of this examination, any cases of malpractices that are recorded or any cases of irregularities that are recorded, we compile all of these, we carry out our investigations, and then we send the report to the Ghana Examinations Committee, and the Ghana Examinations Committee gives us the approval to take to take actions on the recommendations that we present to the committee.
Again, your law empowers you to actually refer the matter to the police for purposes of taking them to court, and if they are found guilty, they could go to jail for 18 months maximum, and they could be paying between 1,200 and 2,400. Are you minded that it is your officers, as in the invigilators and so on, who may have been manhandled in these circumstances, to proceed on this path?
I think you may recall that following the incident that occurred at the Bright Senior High School, a formal complaint has been made by our officers who were involved at the police station. So we'll be following through with that.
Okay. The Ghana Education Service said in paragraph 4 of its statement that all acts of vandalism and other criminal acts should be reported to the security agencies for further investigation and follow-up. Even before that, it suggested that it is referring the matters to the security agencies for further investigation. So are you going to coordinate as institutions, or you are both going to do your work towards discipline and punishment separately?
Well, whatever action that we take, you know, the chairman of the board or the chairman of our committee is the Director General of the Ghana Education Service. And whatever action that the council takes, WAEC needs to make any complaint on its own, we'll do that. Where we need to collaborate with the GS to make sure that any action that is taken is swift, or that we need support when it gets to investigations and all that, we'll do that. So it depends on the nature of the irregularity and the kind of support that the council will need. Okay.
Finally, do you suspect that the GES may be going ahead of you in the manner it is approaching things? You, the WAEC, may have the guidance of what the court had to caution you against before about proceeding to sanction students without taking them through a disciplinary process?
Like I said, taking action when it gets to discipline in schools, WAEC cannot do that because that one is done by the Ghana Education Service. Now, when it gets to cases of irregularity, that is where the council comes in, and then we present our reports to our board, that's the Ghana Exams Committee, and then they give us the approval to take the necessary sanctions. Now, if the Ghana Education Service has asked the candidates who have destroyed property to be surcharged for that, I believe that it is in the right direction, and I believe that that could be part of the rules or the regulations that govern the various schools. So I think that the Ghana Education Service is taking the proper action. Now, when it gets to the candidates who have been barred from taking the examination, there are other opportunities that exist for such candidates. We have the private candidates exam that is coming up, so they can also take they can also register and take that examination.
Okay. My final question to you would be, you have rules and regulations governing the exams. And I think your last rules and regulations, 2016, is what is still in force. It spells out all the do's and don'ts during the examination. Do you take the students through these before they take the exam so that they are minded perhaps not to, conduct themselves in the way we have seen against your invigilators and inspectors?
We do. Every year we carry out sensitization programs. We visit the schools. We talk to the candidates. We give them tips on passing their examinations. Even before this current examination, we have printed posters that we have sent to the schools. And we've also sent every head of school a soft copy of these do's and don'ts, because as I could not go to the schools and engage directly with the candidates. So we sent this material to the schools, and we asked all heads of school to engage with the candidates and let them know the rules and regulations. We also have a document that is titled Directions to Candidates, and this also spells out the rules and the regulations for conducting WAEC examinations. So the candidates are in the know, and they have all these rules and regulations. The supervisors, the heads of schools, and all the authorities in the school also have these rules and regulations. We also carry out briefing sessions before every examination for the supervisors, and at these briefing sessions, they are told what is expected of them. We also use that opportunity to highlight our rules and what they need to pass on to the candidates. So I'll say that the candidates are well informed, and if the candidates are engaging in any form of malpractice, it is not because they do not have the needed information. Okay, I said finally, but if I may ask you this finally. In 2017, the NCCE, National Commission for Civic Education, conducted a public opinion on corruption, accountability, and environmental governance. It spoke to about 9,000 respondents across the country. And when they were asked the question, places where perceived corruption happened, you had 18.2% pointing to schools. 18.2% pointing to schools. There are stories that are being told about particular schools where they clearly buy, the apport, so to speak. And so that explains why consistently their students get straight A's all throughout and all of that. Are you aware of some of these things, and what have you been doing about them? I'm not aware about the reports that you are talking about schools buying apport, because I don't know where they are buying that apport that you are talking about from. But we know that we have, in the course of the examination, we report cases of malpractices in some schools. We cannot say that these are the particular schools that we record malpractices, but we have every year before we release our results, we come out with statistics on examination malpractices, and then we state the kind of malpractices that occurred in these schools. And there are times, I'll say that collusion that was detected in scripts is about the highest form of malpractice that we come across. Last year, for example, that was the highest.
Okay, I think we lost Agnes Kujo there. Thank you very much, Agnes Kujo, Head of Public Affairs, West African Examinations Council, WAEC. Thank you very much. Let me get your comments, starting with you, Bright, about what has transpired. And there's a whole politics of it. Some are saying the children were over-pampered and they are expecting certain things that they didn't get the expectation. Well, the majority of them wrote this exam in a very peaceful atmosphere in the normal, comportment.
It looks like this has been one of the one particular instance of these exams where we've had a lot of agitations in schools directly targeting the exam. Part of that was because the way and manner in which we ask students to come back and write the exams in a normal way did not involve sufficient consultations, I think. I think there was a sense in which, there were a lot of people against it, and, that some time should have been spent to try and build some consensus. So there may be some residual anger among people who thought that in the heat of the agitation, maybe the government will back down. And the fact that the government has not backed down, has gone ahead to conduct elections, has frustrated some students. The exams have frustrated the students. So that might account for some of it. But I wanted to pay more attention because this is just speculation. So on the area in which there is more evidence, I want to spend a bit more time on which is the issue of discipline in schools. I was a student leader in secondary school. And one of the things that I realized even then was that there was a concerted effort by school administrations to decimate student leadership. So the student representative councils were then independent. The Greater Accra Regional SRC was independent. And every effort was made to decimate that independence, to make that impossible, by making the student leaders appointed by the administration. Because when I was in school, the administration had little role to play in how the students were elected. So they needed legitimacy from the students, which meant they needed to exercise real leadership, build confidence, etc. The process has been ongoing now for about 2 decades, where systematically the student representative councils exist only in name. There's almost no student leadership at the secondary school level today. What happens is the administration chooses who they want, appoint them as prefects, and then claim that they are also the representative of the students. I think that has created a context in which students, whenever they have a problem, do not feel that one of the mechanisms for resolving those problems is dialogue. Because there's no mechanism. The student representative councils have been completely destroyed in this country. I think this is a huge contributory factor over the last decade in terms of violence in schools. The other point I want to make quickly is also that when it comes to disciplinary reform in schools, in 2017, we decided to ban corporal punishment finally. There's been a whole bunch of incidents. And we decided to introduce positive behavior management. There is a group at the University of Development Studies headed by Mohammed Gunn Ibrahim that has done a lot of work in this area. And the outcome is that there's a skills gap among teachers to implement these new disciplinary reforms. So while we are banning corporal punishment, we are now using more and more school exclusion instead of actual attempts to reorient the students, teach ethics and things like that. So I think positive behavior management has to be looked at.
Yes or no? The punishment meted out to them harsh?
Well, school exclusions have been shown by this research I'm pointing out as a very effective approach. So no, because the evidence suggests that
the punishment is not harsh.
No, it's harsh, but it's not the right approach.
Okay, thank you. Exclusion, now let's have Dr. Akwete, a few comments. The NCC, for example, issued a statement on this, and they look at the bigger picture. And there are people like Professor Kekwaza Asare who also looks at it from having students at that age even insult the president. And a lot of reference is being made to that. The statements issued by the GES and the rest, they are appalled that students can do this thing. And some are saying, What are the politicians doing? The students have been watching.
Frankly, it is. I mean, what is good for the goose is good for the gander. I mean, we're supposed to set good examples to the students, but our political culture has been, the students view it. Students of today are very smart because of their access to information and technology, global and so on. And they see whatever goes on. My question then, what I like the idea that they did wrong, they were punished, but I'm not sure if the punishment is meant to, is in proportion, but also whether it's a life sentence. You know, they dismissed, they are paying, they are doing this. And I said, fine, it's a sanction. You should not encourage impunity, must be dealt with. But in the bigger society, where they also observe when grown-ups are, what they are doing, these things don't happen. So you have a situation where there's some discrepancy and you don't understand the essence of this. Does it mean that it's a new standard being set, where everywhere you do things that you shouldn't do, whether you are insulting the president or you're behaving in a way that is not, there's action, especially when it has to do with violence. I think the violent aspect is part of what they're trying to deal with. But why don't we deal with it in the bigger society, and particularly in the political arena?
Okay. I'm sorry, but we have run out of time.
Okay.
And like was suggested even before we came on air to discuss this matter, it is a very important issue as it deals with the leaders of this country tomorrow. So we definitely should find some time and look at all the facets of this particular issue. This has been Newsfile. Samson Ladia Anyanini. My guests have been Bright Simmons and Dr. Emmanuel Akwete. And of course, we spoke to others via Zoom. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.